When it comes to customizing your Rust loot tables, we all know the options that are available to us. I've done videos on Magic Loot and we know that it does the trick. We've done a couple of videos on Better Loot and, well, it's just better. But when it comes time for you to totally take control over what your loot table looks like, you just have to move into AlphaLoot. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Rust Admin Academy, where I'm teaching you everything that you need to know about owning and operating a successful Rust server. On this channel, I do plugin reviews and tutorials, plus I want to give you all of the tips and tools that are going to make your Rust server ownership so much easier. If you're brand new to my channel, consider subscribing so that you stay up to date on everything that we're working on and to get the latest updates on the Rust development world. I'll remind you a couple of times throughout the video to hit that like button if you're enjoying what you're watching, so please remember to do so. All right, let's get on to today's video. Now, AlphaLoot is a premium plugin and it's only available from chaoscode.io. I'm going to put a link to it in the video description down below. When you go to that website, you're going to find out that this plugin actually costs $29.99 USD. However, Kilyu was super generous when I told him that I was going to be producing this video, and he gave me a promo code. However, I'm not just going to give you the promo code, you actually have to watch for it somewhere throughout this video. Talk about tricking you into getting me more watch time. That's going to do it. AlphaLoot is a monster of a plugin. There are so many different aspects to it. There's way too much that I could go over in one video. However, today I'm going to give you a really high level overview of how it all works so that you can successfully and confidently get this up and running on your server so that you can finally start dealing with those tricky loot tables that everybody loves dealing with. So the first thing to note is this plugin actually comes in two parts. We've got the plugin itself, plus we have a loot table editor. Now, obviously the plugin, we're going to deal with that. I'm going to show you what that looks like. You simply drag and drop it into your server, let that plugin load, and that's pretty much all you need to do right there. There is a configuration file. We're going to touch on that really quick, but most of your time is going to be spent on the editor, which is installed on your local PC. So you're going to be transferring files from your server into the editor and then back again once you're done making your changes. Right directly from the AlphaLoot page, you can see right here, there's the required dependencies. That is the AlphaLoot editor. You'll want to download that to your local PC, extract that zip folder, and then you're going to have the AlphaLoot editor. The very first time you load your editor on your local PC, it's going to ask you where you have your Rust files located on your local PC. So just give it all that information. Once that's all done, you should be left with a screen that looks similar to this, where it's asking you to input a loot table that you'd like to start editing. We're not there yet though. So obviously first we need to have the loot tables so that we can start editing. So the first thing we need to do is actually install the plugin, and it's going to automatically generate those loot tables for us. So I'm just going to drag and drop AlphaLoot into my plugins folder. In this specific case, I'm actually using Carbon, but this works exactly the same way if you're using Oxide. And having a look at my console right there, it did generate all three of those loot tables that I was expecting it to, and everything looks good on there. So if we head over to our data folder inside of Carbon in this case, or Oxide if you're using Oxide, and go into the AlphaLoot folder, you're going to see a couple of files and folders in there. That's okay. Let's go into loot profiles. This is the information that we want to get to. Inside your loot profiles, these are the 3 loot profiles that I want to download into my local PC so that I can open them up in the editor and actually start making changes. Now, a couple of important things to note here. These loot tables that are generated right here are completely vanilla. So this is exactly what Rust by default or vanilla would generate. So the cool part is once we pull this into an editor, we can actually see how Rust themselves have designed the loot table, and we can kind of learn how to make it feel natural, or you can kind of get into the mindset based on how they built their loot tables. So I'm just going to download all 3 of these files into my local PC, and then I'll show you what to do from there. And there we go. So now the cool part here is that this is actually broken up into 3 individual files. So we've got our default loot table, which is every loot container in the game that we can think of: boxes, barrels, doesn't matter, NPCs even. But then we've got a breakout section that just deals with the heli, and another one that deals with just the Bradley. So I'm going to show you what the default table looks like and all of the different controls that you have all over it. But the example that I'm going to be showing you today, I'll probably use the heli, let's say. So going back to our AlphaLoot editor, we're just going to click on the button in the middle of the screen there that says select. It's going to ask you to input a location for where this file is. So let's just pull up the default loot table right now and we'll see what that looks like. So on the left hand side of the screen are all of the different types of loot containers that you'll find in the game. You may not actually have them currently on your server right now, but they are all there. A good example of that might be the Xmas Tunnel Toolbox or the Gingerbread Dungeon. These types of things, they're not actually in the game right now unless you happen to be watching this during the Christmas event, but you still have control over those loot containers. So when those events do go active, your loot table is already built. So once we click on one of those containers, this is what you're going to see. Now, this is normally where people freak out and they don't know what the hell they're looking at. I totally understand that. I'm not going to lie. The first time I looked at it, I didn't know either. So there's a couple of things you need to know so that you can easily navigate your way around. So if you just go up and down on your mouse wheel, you can go in and out, zooming in and out to make things bigger or smaller. If you want to move down the page, you have to actually middle mouse click and drag and drop. I'm not really sure why KillU hasn't built the functionality in of page down or arrow down, or I'm not really sure, but I'm sure there's a really good reason for it. So at the very top here, we can decide, is this loot table or loot profile for the code locked hackable crate, is this profile going to be enabled? We can toggle that on or off. By default, it's set to on because we want to be editing these things that are going to be happening in the game. Destroy the container when empty, allow skinnable items. Do you want it to automatically go through and refresh the contents of that, whatever that container is? I'm sure there's a reason why that functionality is there, but it's off by default. The loot multiplier, this is kind of huge because this loot multiplier will multiply everything that's in this loot tree that we're looking at right now. So by default, this explosive ammo has a quantity of 1. If we change this loot multiplier to, let's say, 100, then it would automatically make this 100 instead of just 1. So be cautious of that because you can really screw up your economics by using multipliers where you don't necessarily want to. If you wanted to just manually change how many explosive ammo are going to be in this locked crate, then you can just click on that item and change that quantity in that card that comes up. Let's say we wanted to have 300 explosive ammo in this locked crate. So if we have a look here, you'll see there's a little 300 down below that explosive ammo, indicating to you that that is the maximum amount of explosive ammo that's going to show up in that location. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So if we had this refreshed contents turned on, which I don't in this case, we can have a minimum and a maximum amount of time that it waits before it refreshes those items. And of course, we can determine how much scrap is going to be spawned inside this locked crate. Now, as far as the individual items go, I think this is pretty self-explanatory. You can decide which items you want. You can delete items that you don't want. You can change items out. Let's say, for example, I didn't want to have this armored door in here. I can just click on this minus button right here and it deletes that item. Click on confirm, and then we can replace that with something else. Let's say ladder hatch in this case, even though there's ladder hatches other places on this loot table. But it's just that easy to swap out items in a specific part of your loot table. If you wanted to delete an item and not replace it with anything, we of course could just delete this whole section right here, right click on this sub definition right here and click on delete node and children, and that'll remove everything out of there altogether, not even allowing that spot to populate anything. Oh, you can also click on this undo button or redo button here. Those are very helpful tools that I've used thousands of times. When you make a mistake or whatever, it's nice to be able to just go backwards on it. So the one area that I didn't touch on is this item spawn amount limit. So this is obviously set to 18 by default. You can change this to whatever you want. So this is obviously the maximum number of slots that are available for the plugin to put loot into every time it cycles through. By default, this is set to 18 because that's the maximum number of spots in a locked crate, I believe. And you have that control over every single one of these different loot containers in the game. Now, where people run into problems, or what I've experienced, is inside the advanced definitions right here. We have a loops option and a probability option. So it's important for you to understand that the number of loops defines how many times the plugin is going to go through this loot tree and try and find an item that it wants to spawn inside that loot container. If it's set to 1, it's only going to cycle through this entire loot tree one time, and then it'll move on to the next one, and then to the next one, and then to the next one. Now, the probability section is the likelihood that the plugin is going to grab one of these items. By default, this is set to 1, which is a 100% chance that it's going to grab one of the items on this loot tree. If we scroll down a little bit here, down to maybe the more rarer items. So at the very bottom of this default loot table, we've got the MLRS aiming module, but it has a probability of 0.5, which is a 50% likelihood that the plugin is going to grab one of these aiming modules and put it into this locked crate. And with the loop set to 1, it's only going to try one time. So one try and a 50% chance that it might actually grab that aiming module. So if the plugin uses this advanced definition and it hits that 50% probability, it only has one option for items that it might grab. If we scroll up a bit, we've got another advanced definition right above it where the loop is set to 1. The probability is set to 100%, but the individual items have a different weight set to them, which is then their likelihood of being grabbed. So we've got a 25% weight on the AK with some ammo, 25, 25, 25. We've got a 15% chance that it's going to grab an LR with ammo. ammo, and a 10% chance that it's going to grab an L96 with a scope and a little bit of ammo. So this is how you have more control than what you would find out of Magic Loot for sure, and Better Loot definitely, over where things are going to spawn and what the likelihood of items actually spawning. So let's just say, just for example's sake, that I don't want to have the Tommy gun anywhere on this loot table. We're going to delete this node and its children, and we're going to do the same thing with the SMG. Delete that. Let's remove this pistol as well, and let's remove the spaz. This looks like more of what you would find on a modded server. A lot of people don't like to see maybe the lower tier weapons inside of a locked crate. So you're going to need to be cognizant of which loot container we're actually working with, and kind of have a good understanding of what the players on your server are looking for. Like if you have a heavily modded server, they're probably not looking for Tommy guns. They're probably looking for LRs or AKs or M249s. So what I'm doing here, just for organization purposes, I just drag over the entire thing that I want to move, and I can just move it up. My OCD goes crazy when I don't have things lined up, so I have to get rid of all of the spaces and all that other jazz. So there we go. That looks better. And then of course we can go through and increase the weight of each one of these items if we want to increase the probability that one of them is going to get chosen. But honestly, by removing those weapons that we don't want to have on there, we've already increased that probability of one of these being selected. So let's say that we wanted to add another category, another sub definition of items that could potentially spawn in this locked crate. We don't have to use the ones that are existing there. In fact, you probably won't. You're going to go through and change most of those items and maybe even delete an entire tree altogether. Because I mean, let's face it, in some of these loot containers, there's crap items that we don't even want on a modified server. So there's a couple of different ways we can do this. We can copy an existing sub definition, or we can just right click and add a definition node. So from there, we need to decide, are we going to be using multiple different items for this definition node? If we are, we would start adding sub definitions. And then we need to link those sub definitions to our advanced definition. So just drag from the sub definition over to the sub definition section on the advanced definition. I know I'm saying these words multiple times over and over, and it's getting probably annoying. So now all of my sub definitions are now attached to my advanced definition. So we've got the loop set to 1, we've got the probability set to 100%. So chances are pretty good that it's going to grab one of the items that we're going to list right now from this advanced definition. So we're going to right click over here, and we're going to start adding item nodes. So we've got 5 sub definitions with now 5 items attached to each one of them by doing the same thing by dragging on this node and connecting it to that sub definition. So then of course the next step is adding the items that we want to spawn if this one section gets selected. So by clicking on the plus icon, it brings up every single item that is currently in the game. We've got a search bar at the top, so let's just start adding some items from there. All right, so it looks something like that. But all of our weights over here are all set at 1%, so the likelihood of one of these spawning is pretty slim. So by changing these weights to 100%, chances are pretty good that one of these items is going to get selected and put inside this locked crate. If I wanted to increase the possibility of there being more items grabbed from this node tree, I would increase the number of loops to higher than 1, let's say 2. So it's going to loop through this node tree twice in this specific case and try and grab an item to put in this locked crate. So the reason why I left this one down here is because I wanted to show you what else you can do. So we can have an entire category with its own weight. So we're going to add a couple of sub definitions here, and we're going to connect all 4 of these to the sub definition section of this previous sub definition. So now we've got 4 more options, and we can break this out into even more sub definitions, or we can just connect items right now. So you can see the possibilities here. Like, it's literally unlimited as to the number of likely scenarios where an item might spawn. You have full control over that. And this is complicated stuff and time consuming, I should point out. I'm really comfortable with AlphaLoot. I have a really good understanding of how it works, and I'm still hours into my loot table, and I'm not done yet. Not this one. I just created this one just for this video. Once you start getting into this, you'll see the power that AlphaLoot has over the other 2 options. So that's essentially what that would look like after we were done with that section there. That's now behind me there, so let's just move on. So another important thing to note is, if this one sub definition right here does get selected, it's going to grab all 3 of these items and put them inside this locked crate. So because they are 3 different items, it's going to take up 3 different slots. Just something important to think about. In the top right hand corner, when you've made changes to your loot profile like this that we're looking at right now, there's going to be a little arrow with a box. I'm not sure why it's cutting it off there. I wish that it wasn't. But anyways, it starts flashing, indicating to you that you've made changes to this loot profile, that you should probably save it before moving on to the next one. In fact, if you try to move on to something else, it will prompt you to save this loot profile. But you can just click on that button in the top right hand corner that's flashing at me right now. It just saves you some time. Now, once we're done with the loot profile and we want to upload that into our server so that we can actually see it working, it's important that you don't use the same file name that the plugin itself generated for you. You want to have something that's indicative for your server so that you're not actually modifying the default loot table, so that if for whatever reason you needed to go back to that default loot table, you can just simply by loading that default loot profile back into your editor. So I'm going to click on my save profile changes, and then I'm going to click on the save as button in the top left hand corner, and it's going to ask what file name do I want to use. So I just called it modified loot table, and you'll see why this is important in just a second here. I think at the beginning of this video I told you that I was going to be working on a heli table or something. For some reason I decided not to do that somewhere along the way. So anyways, let's save that as modified loot table and head over to the loot profiles in our data folder on our server. Here's where we're going to upload this now modified loot table. Now this is a really large file, so it's going to take a couple of seconds for it to actually upload. And then once that shows up there, we're good to go. We can now use that loot table. But in order to make that happen, we have to actually tell the configuration file which loot table we want to be using. So let's head over to the configuration file. Let's go over all of that. So not a big configuration file, because most of the work that you do is actually in the editor. You don't need to do a whole lot in here. All of these are very self-explanatory. Do you want to auto update the loot table with new items that are added to the game? So Rust adds a new item. Do you want the plugin to automatically add it to your loot table? Yes or no? This is the section where we get to define which loot table we want the plugin to be using. So by default, it's all set to defaults. Obviously, these are the files that the plugin generated automatically as soon as we installed it. So we're now using a modified loot table, and that's what we called it, was modified. And if we had a custom built heli loot table and a Bradley loot table, we would put in those file names here as well. So chances are pretty good that you might call it something like modified Bradley loot table or modified heli loot table, something like that, something that's indicative of what you've done to that loot table so that you can recognize it really quickly. Another really cool thing that you could do is you could have, let's say you wanted to split up your wipe, whether that's a full month wipe or a 1-2 week wipe cycle, whatever, doesn't matter. Let's say you wanted to set up half of your wipe on one loot table and the other half of your wipe on a different loot table. It's simply a matter of having those 2 different loot tables built and changing the file name inside the configuration file and reloading the plugin, and it's going to grab whichever loot table you tell it to use. Powerful stuff. When I'm not playing on one of my own servers, I play on one that I'm completely not related to in any way, shape, or form. But I've recently noticed that the last, I don't know, maybe the last week of their wipe, the loot table is completely changed. And I often wondered how they did it until I started doing this video and realized that it was probably really easy how they did it. They simply changed to a different loot table the last couple of days of wipe. Another couple of really important features here, we can define how many crates the Bradley APC will drop once it's destroyed. Same with the patrol heli. I forget what these default numbers are, but I did change these a little bit for my test server. Now this is important here. If you're using Fancy Drop on your server, you can tell AlphaLoot to either ignore what you've done inside of AlphaLoot and just use the Fancy Drop loot table, or you can make it so that AlphaLoot will override what Fancy Drop is trying to do. If you're not using Fancy Drop, don't worry about this section. You've already built a loot table for your supply drops. Use skin from the skin box list, true or false. By default, this is set to false. Use skin from player skins, skin list. Wow. True or false, default, this is set to false. And use skins from the approved skin list. True or false, this is default set to false. And that's all there is to the configuration file for AlphaLoot. Save it, reload the plugin, and then all of these features that we've now defined, it's now going to do in game. Once we're in game, it's time to test out probably the hours upon hours that you've now put into your brand new loot tables. One of the coolest features built into this plugin is the ability to see what's inside of a loot container simply by going up to it and hitting it with a hammer. However, you need to have a permission for this. So there's a couple of different ways that we can deal with permissions. You can manually add one. You can use Permissions Manager, which is free. You can use Admin Menu, which is from Chaos Code, or in my case, you can use the Carbon panel. So we go into the permissions section, we go into the group because that's what makes the most sense. We're going to go to the admin group, click on AlphaLoot, and we've just got this one permission right here, alphaloot.admin. As soon as we have that permission, we can go up to a loot container and hit it, and it's then going to cycle through about once every 3 seconds the different possibilities that we've now created on our loot table. And because the only thing that I made changes on that loot table for this video is the lockable crate, let's go up and have a look. So as you can see there, and this isn't really going to correlate to anything because I didn't go through and make any fine detailed changes, but you can see the plugin is cycling through the different possibilities that might transpire based on the loot table. So it's a good way for you to check and make sure that the changes that you're making are actually good ones. So if I remember correctly, I removed the Tommy gun and the SMG. Okay, so no, they just appeared there. So obviously they must appear somewhere else on another sub definition inside of my loot table that I didn't deal with. And I was completely off when I said that 18 was the maximum number of slots. That's 36 slots that were available. Where did I get that from that I thought it was only 18? There. Anyways, so it's a great way for you to figure out whether the changes that you're making are good ones or not. Now, there's also a bunch of console commands as well as chat commands that are going to be very helpful for you. But before we get into all of that, I'd just like to take a minute and thank all of my Patreon supporters as well as all of my YouTube member supporters. Without you all, this gets pretty dicey sometimes. So I appreciate all of the time and effort that you all have put into helping me create this, what I've now called Rust Admin Academy. If you'd like to support and you don't already, you can of course check me out at patreon.srtbull.com, or you can become a YouTube member simply by clicking on that join button just down below the video right now. Just know that every penny that is created by all of the different locations that I got set up to create revenue, all of that goes back into Rust Admin Academy and the community that you've all helped me create. So of course, thank you so much, because without you, I wouldn't have been able to do this for as long as I've been doing it for. All right, let's get back into the video. Let's go over some chat commands and some console commands, and then we can wrap this whole video up. So one chat command that is helpful is AlphaLoot view, which is just going to spit something out in chat telling you what's actually inside this container. If we wanted to repopulate what's in this loot container by looking at it, we do AlphaLoot space repopulate, and then we can do AlphaLoot view again, and you'll see that it now says something else. It said 1 semi-automatic body and 5 scrap before. Now it says 1 sheet metal and 5 scrap. If we wanted to repopulate the loot in every single container all over the server, we can use /AlphaLoot repopulate all, pretty self-explanatory. Now the chat commands are important that you know that they're available. However, it's the console commands that I think you're going to have the most fun with. So we've got al.set loot table, and the same thing for the heli as well as the Bradley. The reason why this is so important is we can actually automate this process. So if we're using a plugin like timed execute or something like that, we can put it on a timer for it to automatically switch. By using this console command, we can have it automatically switch to a different profile. So like I was saying before, either halfway through the wipe or maybe just for the last couple of days of wipe, you can switch to a completely different loot profile and have that system completely automated if you want to, or you can just manually use the console command and switch it that way, or you can do it the hard way, change the file name in the configuration file, reload the plugin. Either way works. I just want to show you some of the capabilities of this plugin. The more I'm teaching you about it, the more I'm loving this plugin, and I'm thinking of ways that I can actually implement some of these ideas in my own servers. It's pretty exciting stuff. I love this stuff and I totally geek out about it. I get that maybe not everyone is like that, but I am. We can also use a console command called al.search. And what this is going to do is search for a specific item using that item's short name. It's going to tell you where it appears in all of your different loot profiles. So as you can see there, I just did it on my console, and it says AlphaLoot found the item timed explosive 15 times in 10 different loot profiles. And then it lists out all of the different loot profiles where you would find timed explosives. So a really good use case, in my opinion, is if you were trying to add something into the game that isn't there by default. For example, coffins is a really popular item that won't appear on any default loot table. Or another really good one is if you're using a server that allows for player placed quarries. Let's see which loot profile actually has the mining quarry in it. The item mining quarry was not found in any loot profile. So now we know we need to go back over to our editor, add the mining quarry into one of our loot profiles so that item can be found somewhere within our server and then deployed by the player. But right there, we know that it doesn't currently exist, so nobody's ever going to find one. See? We should be able to do the same thing with coffin.storage, and hey, there you go. It does actually show up on somebody's loot tables, but as you can see there, it's only in the Halloween loot bag, the scarecrow dungeon, and all that stuff. So only things that would be found during the Halloween event. So if you wanted to have the coffin available in a different loot profile, you would of course have to change it from one of those. Not from one of those, you can still have those ones, but you want to add it to something else that isn't dependent on the Halloween event. Just something to think about. Something else that I wanted to show you really quick, because I know a ton of people are going to want to know this, is how to remove a singular item across your entire loot table. So you don't have to go into each individual loot profile and remove each one of those stupid items. So in the top right hand corner there, we've got a button called Quick Actions right here. I know it's a little bit behind my screen there, but we can click on Remove Items, and this is going to remove items from all of our loot profiles. So what's a really dumb item that we know that nobody wants? Let's remove all of the signs. So we're just going to do a search for sign, and we're going to toggle all on. This is going to remove every single sign from our loot table so that we don't have to deal with it when we're going through each individual loot profile. And trust me, I know that this should have been at the beginning of the video, but I'm trying something a little bit new here. So if you're still watching the video at this point, you're getting one of those really cool tips that the people that skipped out of this video at the beginning aren't going to get. We click on apply, we confirm the action. It's going to remove all of the items on our loot table that have the word sign in it. And you can do that with every single item that you don't want to see anywhere on your loot table. A lot of things are craftable without researching any blueprints or using up any scrap for researching items. Some of those items appear on the default loot table, and especially if you're on a heavily modded server, you don't need any of that crap. You don't want it anyways. So just completely remove it from your loot table. Time saved. Players are going to love it. You're going to love how easy it is. It's glorious. Anyways, there's a bunch of other quick actions that you can take up in there. I'm not going to go through each one of those, but just know that those quick actions are there. It should have a big blinking light there that says, here, click on me because I have cool features in here. It doesn't. Anyways, that is finally AlphaLoot. I think I've been doing this for about 4 years, and I usually get about 10 requests a month for AlphaLoot to be covered on video form. I don't know why I put it off for so long. If I had to come up with a reason, probably because I was intimidated by it too. Once I decided that I was doing this video and I started to learn the ins and the outs of it, it's not that bad. I should have done this video years ago. By now I will have displayed the promo code a couple of times. So if you are going to Chaos Code to purchase AlphaLoot, it's a great time to buy it, a great way to save a couple of bucks. I know that it's on the more expensive side. Hopefully by this video, you know how powerful it is. And I hope you appreciate the promo code as much as I do. Just know that I'm not getting any kickbacks for that. That promo code is just for you, the viewer. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you on the next one.